the world champion Domaraju Gukesh taking on our Praggnanandhaa. Both of them finished with the same score at the end of the classical tournament, 8.5 out of 13. Surprisingly, both lost the last round, but here they are fighting it out in the tie breaks. Gukesh has the white pieces. It's going to be two games of 3 minutes plus 2 seconds increment. I like how both of them are adjusting pieces. The photographers in the background move away. The players shake hands and off we go. Gukesh opens the game with knight to f3, pawn to d5, and we have c4. Pragg defends the pawn, g3 played, and knight comes out to f6. The bishop is developed. It could be Catalan if white can play d4, but Pragg says you are not going to play d4. I am going to snatch the space, brings his knight out to c6, and now the bishop comes out to c5. White can now break in the center with e3 or go knight d2 to knight b3 and attack the bishop. Let's see what's the route that Gukesh chooses. He plays pawn to a3, trying to play b4 and expanding on the queen side. It stopped instantly. The bishop comes out and pins the knight. The next idea is to get your knight to d2, to e4, h6 played. He takes, queen takes f6, and now the knight comes out. There's a small threat to attack the queen and the bishop. Pragg comes back with the queen. And now what will Gukesh do here? Because knight e4 is possible. There's also a possibility to bring the queen to c2, rook b1, try for somehow getting b4 into the position. Also, queen a4 is not such a silly move to pin the knight on c6. Very intense is the atmosphere here, and you can see that a lot of people are still waiting in the crowd. a4 played. Pragg is ready to give up his bishop here. Queen takes c5, and now knight comes back to d2. Black castles. I love how the bishop is opened up here, and the queen comes up to c2, connecting the rooks. And maybe at the right time you want to play b4, and after en passant take it back with the knight to attack the queen. He pushes his pawn to e5, gaining more center control. The rook comes up to b1. Gukesh has 2 minutes 12 seconds and Praggnanandhaa has 2 minutes 30 seconds. He goes rook a7. I love this move that Pragg has played because he's managed to minimalistically defend the b7 pawn here with the rook and also keep the rook active. Now this is an active rook, but also the a3 pawn is a bit loose. He brings his queen back to e7, and now there can be plans of taking on c6. It could be possible in some lines, but it's not something that you must do lightly because the light squares around your king start to get weakened. He goes rook b5. Very interesting move here by Gukesh, because think about it. Now the a3 pawn is hanging, so Pragg is calculating. Rook takes, queen takes, and now you're a pawn down. But I can take on c6, b takes c6, rook takes the central pawn, but now the king is weak and you go in bishop h3. All of a sudden there is queen a1 check in the air. The rook can join in here, and this is big trouble. So maybe it might not be such a bad idea for Praggnanandhaa to snatch this pawn. Look at him calculating precisely there. The focus bit of both the players is simply incredible. And this is making Pragg think a lot. He takes it. He snatches the pawn after 56 seconds of thought. And Gukesh now has to decide whether he wants to go into this crazy line of giving it up and then taking the pawn on e5, which clearly is super risky. But if you don't do something and you move your rook away, you are a pawn down. And that is definitely something to be careful about. And he plays rook to e1. This is very interesting because Gukesh wants to break in the center with e3 and places the rook opposite the queen. But it's clear that black is now doing really well. Let's see what Pragg does here. He brings his rook back to a7. He has 54 seconds left. Queen comes to b2, putting even further pressure on b7. You can't push the pawn because the knight would be hanging on the long diagonal. This is the first game here, and the pressure that's mounting is huge. Rook d8 played, and now h4 by Gukesh. He would like to maybe clamp down the position with h5. And knight b8, fantastic move here by Praggnanandhaa. He wants to play c6. e3 played, breaking open in the center, c6. Rook comes back to b3. And Pragg moves the queen away to c7. He brings his knight out. And here knight a6, not the best move. c5 would have been much better. Because now you can pin the knight here and Gukesh finds it. That's really amazing. He finds, and now this is a bit of a pin here. The queen is attacking this. Pawn takes, and you do have knight takes d4, because if queen takes, this rook e8 deflecting tactic. But for now, Gukesh gets in. He attacks the rook, both the rooks here. So if you play queen takes a3, there is queen takes d8. He plays rook a8 back. Now there's a tactical sequence here. Knight takes d4, queen takes d4, check on e8. And if you take, the queen is hanging. So you go king h7, and then queen takes d8 is possible. So can Gukesh find this tactic? He has quite less time on the clock. But he thinks and he takes it with 30 seconds invested there. Knight comes back to c7, and look at this move, knight b5. If you take with the knight, this is hanging. If you take cb5, there is take, and check. But he doesn't spot it. He goes rook e8, knight a8, plays queen a7, attacking the knight. This was a brilliant tactic, by the way. Bishop, knight comes back to c7. And the queen comes back. If you take on d4, I have take on c7. This game is so sharp. Both the players trying to be as accurate as possible. He takes, queen takes c7. He takes on d3. So again, Pragg is a pawn up, but the rook enters the 7th rank, attacking f7. Rook f8 maybe. No, he goes bishop e6. But now he gives up the pawn on b7. Gukesh takes it. Pragg will take on c4. Gukesh will take on c6. It will be a draw. Nobody pushes. c5 played, and a blunder here. Rook e8 check coming. Gukesh finds it. Look at Gukesh there. Like a hawk, getting his prey. Check. King up. He brings his queen back. Bishop f5. Puts his queen, his rook up. Oh my goodness. This turned so quickly. Bishop comes back, and there's a check, and Gukesh has won the game. He has an extra rook. Pragg resigns. What a finish this was. Incredible end from an equal position. Pragg resigns because of the blunder, and Gukesh now leads the tie-break 1-0. He puts back the pieces like he does always, arranges it back. Pragg has left. The arbiter comes in to set up the pieces. The other arbiter comes to change the names and reverse the colors. It's all happening very quickly. The second game is about to begin now. As both the players enter in, this time Pragg has the white pieces. and is in a must-win situation. A draw would mean Gukesh becomes the 87th Tata Steel Masters champion. Let's see what Pragg does in this must-win scenario. Just the pieces. Huge pressure on Pragg's shoulders. Will he deliver? He shakes hands. Time begins. D4. Knight comes out and he plays the Trompovsky. Reminds us of the Anand Karpov match where Vishy in a must-win scenario went for the Trompovsky E3. And Gukesh takes a bit of his time, plays G6, the knight comes out. Bishop G7. Black castles here. H3 played. And the speed at which Gukesh is playing shows that he seems to be well prepared here. Pawn to C5. I like how Gukesh is in his hoodie while Pragg is in his suit and formal attire. C3 played, solidifying the center. And pawn to B6. The bishop comes out to D3. And generally in such positions, it's better to keep your bishop on E2, not on D3. Because when E5 comes in, by the way, H6, bishop comes back now. The bishop on D3 is going to be misplaced, like in this situation. E5 takes, knight takes. The D3 bishop would be hanging. He plays his bishop back to G3. And the bishop comes to B7. Interesting position. Pragg hasn't gotten much out of the opening and Gukesh is doing pretty well. And there's also the pressure of having to win. How is Pragg going to manage all of this? He brings his bishop back to E2. Not a very happy move that you have to make. Strikes in the center, pawn takes, knight takes on E5. And pawn to A4, clamping down on the queen side there. He would like to play A5 perhaps. The knight goes back to D7. And the queen comes to C2. Maybe just knight F6. He plays rook E8, good move. Knight F6, knight E4 would be better. Look at both the players bringing in all their pieces. Pragg has to at some point think about the E4 break. He goes queen E7 here. And plays his queen back to B1. And Pragg is waiting here. Knight F6, knight E4. This could be a good idea just to keep an eye on the E4 square. But Gukesh makes a small error. He goes knight F8. He's going here and he's allowing E4 to be played. This is not an easy thing because E4 pawn takes bishop D3 and I'm pinning the pawn here because of the queen. He plays bishop F1 first. The knight comes to F E6. But this time Pragg manages to break in the center. E4 met with D4 now. And of course you don't want to take. So queen C2, fantastic move. Because when the pawn is taken on C3, you want to take back. Controlling this square. The other advantages of this pawn being on E4 is that you can push it to E5 next. The knight can jump from E4 or C4 into the D6 square. That is something. And also the bishop is beautifully positioned on F1 to come to C4 or B5. So Praggnanandhaa has managed to gain something in this position, which is good news for him. And Gukesh is right now burning his time. Maybe rightly so. It's not at all easy what he ought to be doing. Knight G5 to trade off the knights looks like one idea. Knight A5 trying to stop knight C4. He goes knight G5. And now Pragg can take on G5. He can push E5 also. But there's an incredible move, avoiding the knight trade with knight h2, preparing f4 and e5, and Pragg finds it. Wow! Praggnanandhaa showing that when it is the crunch moment, he can raise his game, not feel the pressure. Amazing. Goes rook d8. Gukesh is angling maybe a pawn push in the center of the board. If feasible. Let's see. How does white continue now? Pragg can push his pawn right into the center of the board, and he does it. e5, another powerful move. Next up, f4, knight e4, knight d6. Oof. And Gukesh has 1 minute left. Pragg also around 1 minute 10 seconds. Look at the focus with which both the players are looking at the board. Oof. And Gukesh unable to figure out what to do because he would like to take the pawn, but f4 would have lost him material. Instead, here he goes queen c7, allowing maybe e6 to set up this attack. Will Pragg push the pawn? Is the question. Important moment, Pragg goes knight to g4. And there is knight e5 possible now. Take, and it's better for black there. But he goes king h8, a mistake. Pragg now brings his knight to the center. Gukesh misses his opportunity there. Now the knight defends the pawn and is also entering the d6 square. Knight e6 played. And the knight jumps in, rook to f8. The bishop enters in. The white pieces are completely flowing here. Bishop can take the knight. And Praggnanandhaa senses his opportunity. He knows that this is almost over. He comes queen c1. He attacks this pawn on h6. Now knight f5 could be possible. He goes queen c6, threatening mate in 1 here. Pragg has to be careful. Of course, he's going to spot it. He has 35 seconds. Takes on b7. Queen takes and then chops off the pawn on h6. Now he's pawn up. Also, the black king is in trouble. The knight comes to the center of the board. He comes back to g4. Queen e7 played. And the rook enters in. He lifts his rook. Queen g5 offering a trade of queens. You can take it and play now bishop h4, which will win you material. But instead he takes in the center. Knight jumps. Rook comes back to d2. Takes in the center. Oof. Is Gukesh fighting back? Not really. The rook attacks the pawn. If you go rook d8, there's again bishop h4 pinning here. Knight c6. He attacks the knight. Knight goes back to e7. And finally this trick works. If you move the knight on e7 is hanging. There's no way to defend here. Gukesh resigns. Pragg equalizes the score. 1-1. What a match we have on our cards. This time, Praggnanandhaa arranges the pieces. It's beautiful. What is happening here? Gukesh, as always, pays his respects to the board. But now, guys, after this game ended in a 1-1 tie, we now go on to the sudden death, which is the third game. And you can see Gukesh in your frame. And Pragg will also join in. Basically here, white will get 2.5 minutes. Black will get 3. And there is a 2-second increment. In case of a draw, we have another such game with reversed colors. And the one who wins becomes the champion. Gukesh gets black pieces. Pragg has white. Now, is white worth 30 seconds on your clock? Is the big question here. Not so sure. The players shake hands again. Pragg sits with his slightly, uh, the way in which he would sit like a little kid when playing blitz with one leg folded on the chair because he wants to be super focused here. And off we go, guys. D4 by Pragg because it worked in the previous game. Why not again? And look at Gukesh. He's spending 10 seconds here. Does he want to like equalize the time or what? D5 played this time by Gukesh. I guess he was just calming himself down there. And this time we have the London system. Pawn to e6, e3 played, striking in the center with c5. And he plays bishop e2, offering a trade of bishops, takes, castles, black castles as well, striking in the center with c4. He takes pawn, bishop takes. And pawn to a6. So very interesting opening we have on the board where Gukesh, we can say, is slightly worse because the bishop is not yet developed. White has all the pieces developed here. But at the same time, with the queens of the board, it is also quite equal. And remember, a draw means that the match continues. It's sudden death, but only when someone wins. In case of a draw, it's not. He goes bishop d7. The rook comes to c1. Maybe the idea is to take here. Bishop drops back to e7. Pragg seeing if he can make use of his slight lead in development. It's not at all easy how to do it. Perhaps just move the bishop away, knight c4. Yes, he does it. Knight c4, knight b6, knight d6. These are the ideas that you can play with. But Gukesh has knight to d5 coming in. He has moves like bishop b5, which are very, very interesting. He does play knight d5, attacking the bishop here. The bishop drops back and bishop b5. Fantastic move. Because if bishop takes b5, a b5, it activates the rook down on the a file. What to do here? Pragg already getting a bit low on the clock. But yeah, he did start with 30 seconds less there. And now takes, pawn takes, a3 played. Gukesh brings his knight to c6 right into the center of the board. The rook enters, rook to d1. Will black now break with b4? He plays rook c8. Just the pressure is mounting here. King f1 makes a lot of sense to bring your king into the center with king e2. Gukesh plays his knight to b6. His idea is to come to a4 to attack the b2 pawn. I have to tread carefully here. Praggnanandhaa thinking. And he plays his knight to e4. This knight is heading to d6. This knight could head to c5. Many locations. But with the knight going to from here, knight c4 or knight a4 definitely becomes a possibility to attack the b2 pawn. He plays his knight to c4. Pressure is intense here. Rook takes rook. If rook takes rook, you have a4 move. Because ba4, your knight is hanging. And Pragg ready to play here. Last minute left for him. Takes. But he doesn't find a4. He plays rook c2. This is slightly passive. It allows Gukesh to come in with a check, go to the back of the pawn and attack b2. Oof. How do you defend this? Suddenly, b3 doesn't come in, a3 is hanging later. Oh, is Pragg in trouble? And he has 30 seconds less on the clock as well now. Oh my goodness. Seems like Gukesh is going to push through takes. Take on b5. Knight comes back. And although the material is even, this pawn is falling. Comes up king d3, takes. And king comes up to c4. Wow. This is getting super intense here now. King to c4. And the knight goes back. He moves his bishop in. Knight c8. Look at how the pawn controls the light squares. The knight controls the dark squares. This is big trouble for Pragg. King b5. And now bishop to d6. Just take. Knight takes. This should be winning. Or even bringing the king in. But he goes f6. Slightly slow. Allows the knight to come from c4 to a5 to b7. Maybe attacking this in this way. And Gukesh has time on the clock. So he tries to think a bit. Which is logical now. How can Gukesh continue here? His fight for the full point. King f7. Knight is coming in. He gets his king in. Knight c4. Bishop drops back. Because he had to defend his bishop. And now Pragg can play a pawn to f3. But he goes knight f5. Bishop comes here. Takes. Knight takes a check. King jumps in. But the problem now is that these pawns are going to get a bit weak. So Gukesh can still try here. Knight e4. Jump in, attack f2. If f3, go knight d2, knight f1, attack e3 and h2. Too many possibilities. Goes knight c3. And Pragg takes on b7 with the king. Nice move there. Because otherwise there was knight d5 check and you would have dropped the e3 pawn. He goes e5. King comes to c6. Goes knight d1. Knight comes back to c4. White is still slightly in trouble, but now I think getting back on feet. g6. The knight on d1 is a bit trapped here. Pragg is trying to come back, maybe to trap the knight, but Gukesh is going to strike in the center with f5. Yeah, he pushes his pawn to f5. King b4. Takes. Knight f2. The knight jumps back. Now e4 isn't hanging. But knight g4. He goes first king d6. Pragg checks. King comes back. Are they going to draw the game? Is Gukesh okay with a draw? No, he wants to fight on. King to c4. Knight g4. Now h2 is hanging. Knight e3 check coming in. Praggnanandhaa, you can see him not too happy but finds knight f1. Good move. Goes and attacks this pawn. King jumps into the center. White is now equal. The position should end in a draw here. But check. Oof. He moves his knight here. Oh, that's a mistake. Check. And all of a sudden, if you take the knight, you're losing. If you move the knight, the e-pawn is strong. So he sacrifices his knight here in the center. King takes e4, attacking the knight. Pragg is now a full knight up. Gukesh has given up his knight just in the hope that he will be able to capture both the pawns. Knight f6, attacking h7, h5 played. The king comes in. Pushes his pawn to h4. A king goes in. And somehow h3. And finally Pragg has stabilized. There's no g4. Knight is controlling. If you go king g3, I take. And look at Gukesh there. He's so upset. Praggnanandhaa knows he's won here. He's the champion. Gukesh resigns. Praggnanandhaa becomes the 87th Tata Steel Masters champion with this victory. What a finale we've had. And look at that. Gukesh is so upset because in the final game, he was better. He was pushing. He had no chances of losing there. But that's how brutal chess is. That's how tie breaks work. Sometimes the position on the board is in your control, but the clock sometimes it's not. And Gukesh still can't believe that he lost that. There's a lot of pressure riding there, but in spite of everything that happens, Gukesh just puts back the pieces there for white and black, and he's just trying to come to grips with the fact that he has lost this. But what a tournament we have had, and what great fighters, both of them. Kudos to Gukesh for fighting so hard, and kudos to Praggnanandhaa for not giving up right until the very end and becoming the champion of this amazing event.